understand that because you are still the imam. Well, I had a different view of Islam than many of the Muslim brothers. I became a member of OAU, and for 18 years the bodyguard to his sister Ella, which is one of the institutions that helped create the consciousness that we call Malcolm X. Okay, and it's important to understand we are bodies, but we are also consciousness, and our consciousness is influenced not only by information, but from whom and how you receive your information and what context that information comes to you in. And I've spent many, many years since then, having spent much time living in the household of Ella and with most of the family members, the younger ones. Malcolm became as much a part of my mental reality as my mother or father. There's a lot to be understood about this brother, but we'll do the quick biography first because there's a lot in that people miss. Because in the end we tried, I heard the brother talking about socialism. Malcolm looked at socialism. He looked at Islam. He was a Muslim. Most people, when they hear you say Muslim, they don't know what Islam is. Islam has its own ideological perspective on reality. It's a worldview. It's not just a get down and pray, go to church, or go to mosque, do your thing. There is a worldview in Islam that covers economic, politics, and culture. But Malcolm also made a statement when he came back about putting your religion in the closet, because he had encountered another worldview, one that most of us are afraid to deal with, and it is the worldview of the African psyche. We want to deal with Malcolm Little, and we deal with Big Red, and we deal with Satan, and we deal with Malcolm X, and we deal with Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, but we don't want to deal with Omar Wali. Now, what I don't understand is how come we can give all these other phases of his life validity, but when he arrived at the goal, becoming an African again, that has to die. And so we need to look at his life and watch what occurs. Now here's a young African man, born of parentage from the Caribbean and the United States, which is classic for many of us in the Northeast. I was born of parentage from the U.S., African and Native American, but all of my children have a parent from the Caribbean and a parent from the United States. That's not new, and that is how many, many of us fit. But what came with Malcolm having a parent, Sister Louisa from Grenada, and a background of resistance and revolution against colonialism, that she, coming out of St. Andrews province there in Grenada, represented in the resistance of that part of the family, and then coming out of the Little family out of Georgia, representing another kind of resistance to white suppression and oppression. Malcolm had this fusion, and especially where that fusion got galvanized by the Honorable Marcus Garvey, since both of his parents was members of UNIA, and not just passive members, but very active members of UNIA. And Louisa may have been more active than Mr. Little, because there is record to show that Louisa was the secretary of at least 2 UNIA chapter, and that Louisa did indeed hid Marcus Garvey for more than 2 to 3 weeks when he was on the run from the federal authorities in the U.S. Now, living in the Midwest where state terrorism is on you and white supremacy and racism is at its height, it took a lot of guts for a woman to hide that man out in those days and times in that part of the United States. So Louisa Little must then be looked upon as not just a militant, but as an African revolutionary participant on a very active level. And the mother has more impact on the consciousness of a child in the early days than the father. And since Malcolm was, due to white terrorism, made a member of a single parent household headed by a female very early, we must then say Mr. Little had some impact on him, but the primary impact on Malcolm came from Louisa Little. You got to be very clear about that's the history. That's the way it was. That's the way it is. Louisa, also in her resistance against the system and moving to Lansing and buying that land, that farm out there, and trying to raise her children, selling the commodity of the farm, taking care of themselves because she didn't want welfare, then they burned her out. First they made rules that said you couldn't legally do this or that, and then they burned her out. When Louisa resisted and did try to get compensation for her children, in resisting the abuse of the state officials, they used the mental institution as a way to incarcerate a very sane African woman, as they used the mental institutions in those days to incarcerate many of us when they couldn't use their legal apparatus to put us in the penitentiary system. So Malcolm went from being born into a whole family to being a child under state terrorism in a single-parent family to being an orphan without any parents before he's a teenager. There is dramatic impact and trauma upon this youngster doing these experiences. He goes from being an orphan into being a juvenile delinquent. I mean, stealing and doing other stuff that you do when you got to eat and you ain't got no mama and daddy and your oldest brother is trying, who's just a teenager himself, trying to make ends meet, to going into the child welfare system, which some of us know very well. Hello, how are you? Oh, good, I didn't see you, I'm so sorry. But going into the child welfare system and begin to become subject to the abuse inherent in that system even today. And then becoming an orphan in a white home environment, group home environment, where when he does start exercising his intellect to grow, he becomes the president of his little class, but when he decides that he wants to be an attorney someday, he's told by the very symbol of his role modeling aspiration that the best you can hope for is to be a carpenter, because there's no place for your kind in the legal world. The impact of all of these things on this child, who began to rebel again and move away, spending more time with his older brothers, then gets someone reaching in, his very wealthy sister out of Boston, Ella Collins, one of the most underestimated figure in the black movement during this period of time. And Ella, who is classic upper to middle class, middle to upper class black Roxbury resident, whose wealth comes from real estate, who is very much the political leader in the black community and very instrumental in getting Tip O'Neill elected to the city council and then to the Congress of the United States, which gives her much debs in the black community, meaning she can get what she wants politically. And that means you can get almost what you want economically to a point. Makes her a very powerful figure. If you know these things, you understand that she will be the one later who will name the early blacks who go to city council and other positions in Boston because where Ella sits. Okay? So she becomes Malcolm's guardian. But Malcolm, coming out of what is, Lansing, Michigan, was pretty much a one-horse town, rural Midwest, coming into this massive Roxbury, Boston environment. That was like, me moving from Georgetown, South Carolina to Harlem back in '62, And coming out of a family in Michigan that was economically deprived of all of the things I mentioned in his background, the homelessness, the single-parent family, the orphans. Now he's got everything. Because Ella's got one of the finest homes in Roxbury. It's still there. Her son Rodnell lives in it now. Up on a hill, classic top shelf, Negro middle class existence of those days. But Malcolm wanted to hang with the boys in the hood. And you find a lot of reference to this in the book Malcolm and Me from the Dead Level by Hakeem Jamal, when he deals with them drinking wine on the corner and hanging, doing all the things many of us did when we were younger. I still remember my Thunderbird days and, the other stuff that we did. And in hanging out, he gets involved in, the drinking and the smoking of the reefer and the mischief that young people get into. And shoplifting. I was quite a shoplifter myself. I could do something like $200-300 a week in the old days. I don't do it anymore. You know what I'm saying? And we had what we thought was good motives back in those days. But these are the kinds of things, and I mentioned my role, like many of you have been involved in some of this stuff. Matter of fact, most of the things we say Malcolm's criminal life, most of us did those things and got away with it. Malcolm's problem was he had 2 white girlfriends and got busted. And he had to go to jail, not so much for having such a big burglary ring, because if you read the book, you won't find nothing in there that makes Malcolm a significant crook. He's just a petty little punk, not even a decent criminal achiever. But his crime is he had not 1 white girlfriend, but 2. And when the district attorney tried to get those 2 white women, and to their credit as human beings, to say Malcolm and the other brother had raped them, they wouldn't. And so Malcolm and the brother were sentenced to the maximum that could be given for such a foul burglary situation, which usually wasn't given to anybody. So they were sentenced for his relationship with the white women. I'm laying this out like that because we got to focus on some reality, because Malcolm was real. Malcolm was any young black man or woman that get involved in the crisis situations, that living in an urban situation that's economically unviable, as so many of our kids do. He's suffering from these things, all the crisis that besets our family due to the oppression and the domination of the super elite that runs this country and the world. Okay? And the ignorance on the part of the masses that allow them to do it. Because without our support, it could not exist. And without our ignorance, they wouldn't have our support. You understand what I'm saying? So this brother goes to prison, and in prison he does meet some informed African-American men who get him after a while and by on a track where he began to study, read, and begin to reconstruct himself. Even before the Nation of Islam, the reconstruction of Malcolm X began along the line of self-education. He realized that education is primary and reading is essential in order to be educated. So he began the process with the assistance of some brothers in the penitentiary and his sister Ella to re-educate himself, to reconstruct this debilitated creature that the system in America had destroyed from the time it was a child through the attack on his father, his mother, and the rest of that family, and then his race. But then he would meet the most dramatic and phenomenal, how do you say, ideology. The ideology of the lost found nation of Islam in the West, which is an ideological expression of aspects of the Moorish Science Temple of America founded by Noble Drew Ali. Okay? With some of the economic underpinnings of the UNIA founded by the Honorable Marcus Garvey, and with an overlay of Ahmadiyya Islam coming from Master Farad Muhammad. So, because if we know the Drew Ali story, we know he started here in Newark, New Jersey. We knew he got driven out of Newark, New Jersey because there was a Saudi Arabian named Farad Muhammad, who disappears after Drew Ali has to leave. When Drew Ali surfaces in Detroit, another man surfaces with just the opposite name, Farad Muhammad, messing with him there. Drew Ali, one day in the late 20s, is out of town doing his lectures when his second in command is assassinated. When Drew Ali returns to Detroit, he's arrested for suspicion of that assassination. He's released on bail, and 3 days later, he's assassinated in the streets of Detroit. Nobody ever arrested for it. Out of the dust of the Moorish Science Temple in Detroit rises the lost foundation of Islam in the West. Whatever all of the other intricacies is, y'all go read books and find out. I just wanted to kind of lay that so you can see the foundation. Then we talk now about a young man who's not a part of this initial history, but will be influenced by his brothers and sisters bringing this newfound knowledge of some black men and women who are saying the white man's activities prove he is the devil, and that we, the black men, are truly gods on earth, And our way of life is the beginning of all things, and we are primary. And he begins to say, yeah, this sounds good to me, given the stuff I went through. This is all right, you know. And in his history, in his studying history, before the Nation of Islam, that knowledge allowed him to see the claims of the Nation of Islam in sense of what he considered to be some truism. That, yeah, this sounds valid to me because I see this in history, and this is what happened, and this is what they did, and the nation said they did it. They got to be the devil. Okay? So when he gets out of the prison, this allows him to speed up his parole date and allows for him to leave the prison system in the guardianship of his brothers. And he goes to Lansing or to Detroit, and he meets the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who likes this young mind. And remember now, Elijah has been in the Nation of Islam business. When does Malcolm get out of jail? This what, 52? 51, 52? Elijah and him had been in the Muslim business since the late 20s. But they hadn't accomplished very much. They had maybe, I'd say under 1,000 members, and I think I'm giving a lot. They had 4 temples, and in 11 years, this young man opens 47 temples and boosts the membership to well over 200,000, if not close to 500,000 members. Okay? Now, you can't take that away from Malcolm X. He did in 11 years, what? How many times 4 that is? 47, to get 47. Than all of the rest had been able to do initially. So you have to then raise the question, whose Malcolm is he? Is he a product of Elijah? If he is, then why wasn't one of his sons that product? Why the stranger's son? Or is he a product of his own mind, assisted by the opportunities the nation affords in terms of a vehicle and a disciplining process that allows what he was to become? You see? Because there were other men in the nation for decades before he came there. Why couldn't they build 47 temples? Why couldn't they shake the world? So it isn't just about what was there, but you cannot negate Elijah's role in his life, nor negate the nation as a vehicle that allowed him to grow and to express and to gain an understanding of the reality facing Africans that he did. Because he was out of the nation for less than a year. And we tried to make that more important. You can't do that. That 11 months or so that he was out of the nation was dynamic. And I think we think it was dynamic because white folks thought it was dynamic. They played it in their media. We have a tendency to, whatever the media plays up, we play up. Whatever they say is important, we say is important. Whatever dialogue they engage in, we engage in. But there was 11 years of growth. There was 11 years of participating in the black struggle and carrying on dialogue. And the things that he was saying in those last 12 months were not new things. He had some new experiences which broadened his scope, as he said, but they were not new things. We need to listen to his speeches and be honest. Malcolm went to Mecca, and most people says that changed him. But Malcolm had been to Africa before. Anybody know the year Malcolm went to Africa before?
I think it was around 58 or
1958, when he opened the way for Elijah Muhammad to make his Hajj to Mecca. Elijah Muhammad was Hajj Muhammad.
Yes.
He made his pilgrimage to Mecca. Not Umrah, but Hajira. And I found that out myself from going to Mecca and having the Rabat Alim al-Islamim ask me, how is Hajj Muhammad? And I told them I was unaware that Muhammad had made a Hajj. I thought they were mistakenly calling Malcolm Hajj Muhammad. They said, no, we're talking about Elijah. Okay? And so I learned and was educated. And I learned at that point that Malcolm went and opened the way for him. So then we have to address some of the things Malcolm said then when he came back and what was the motive for his saying it. Because Malcolm made us think that he had become acquainted with the Middle East for the first time.
Right. Yes.
and that was not historically
That's
accurate.
Right, that's not accurate at all.
But back up a little, and there's some things I can't say because having been in that family, I know personal things that may not be my right to share with the public, but I do know that Ella Collins was a very close confidant of both King Faisal and King Saud. And I know that Malcolm was acquainted with both, even before he became a member of the Nation of Islam or before he went to prison. So we missing something here, aren't we?